Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 201 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information. You can try StrengthCoach.com out for 3 days for just $1, and you'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. Check it out at StrengthCoach.com. All right, I'm your host, Anthony Wren, and the show notes are located at StrengthCoachPodcast.com. Want to get in touch with me, shoot me an email to StrengthCoachPodcast@gmail.com. All right, it's been a while. I had a month break here from the podcast. Just been a little crazy. I had to change internet providers, and just with scheduling of that and dealing with some other things and logistics of both podcasts, my Stop and Give Me 20. It's just been a little crazy, but we're going to be giving you one every week now for the next couple weeks to catch up. So, all right, well, let's talk about today. On the Coach's Corner, I spoke to Coach Boyle about coaching clients in pain, as well as his article, The Plight of the Elite Fast Twitch Athlete. That and much more coming up on the Coach's Corner in a little while. Aaron McGurr from Perform Better joins us to talk about the current sale, the One Day coming up in Boston on March 18th, and the Agility Trainer Pro. For the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment, Rachel Cosgrove is on to talk about being an entrepreneur, having focus, organization, and time management. The Functional Movement System segment has Kyle Kiesel on to start a 3-part series on breathing. He does a great job with this. Today he talks about some background info on breathing. For the Hit the Gym of the Strength Coach, I have on Brett Bartholomew, author of one of the most talked about books out there right now. Everybody's anticipating this book, Conscious Coaching. He's on to talk all about the book. We spoke about what the book is not, who is the conscious coach, how is it different from the art of coaching, current coaching culture, say that 3 times fast, right now in our industry, athlete archetypes, dark-sided leadership traits, that's pretty interesting, and so much more coming up with Coach Bartholomew. All right, well, lots of things to get to, so let's get on the phone with Coach Boyle. All right, now it's time for the Coach's Corner with Coach Boyle. Coach, how you doing?
I am doing excellent, Anthony. How are you?
Doing great. You sound wonderful now that you're on Skype.
I know. I have to admit that I did listen to the last one that we did on Skype and thought it was better. So here we are, back with Skype.
All right, there we go. Cool. Coach, let's actually start out with just got this past weekend, you had the Mike Boyle Winter Seminar, and Hank Kreinhoff was there, and you had all of your staff up there doing some lectures, so they did a great job, the little 20-minute TED-style talks. I just want to talk a little bit about Kevin Kars. He got into some of the pain science, and we've had Jonathan Fass on here. We've had David Joyce on here talking about some of the pain science and coaching through pain. I just wanted to see what your take is on it, because sometimes, it when it seeps into your staff and your crew and the guys you trust and you guys that are working with your people every week, it's when you start to think, okay, maybe you're onto something. You guys are onto something. So have you kind of listened to this stuff and thought about some of the cueing or the coaching? Has the coaching changed a little bit? Have you tried to talk to people a little bit less about injuries and certain things? Has anything changed with some of the pain science?
Well, I think and I don't know if I think it's more pain psychology than pain science, to be honest. And interestingly enough, that's my topic this year for Perform Better, is training the client with chronic pain. And I decided to do it before Kevin had put his talk together, which I thought was interesting. And as I said, there were a couple slides that I think I might clip out of his and throw into mine. But the big thing that I saw and that I kind of focused on, and that I think it was Jonathan Fass talked about, the kind of nocebo effect. And the idea, and I don't think the nocebo effect, I guess it is science in the sense that it is scientifically proven that it happens, But I think we have to look at the idea that we can put thoughts in our clients' heads in one direction or in the other. And one of the things that I started focusing on right at the beginning of my talk was just the idea, don't use words like wrecked, arthritic, bone on bone. People, I think therapists and people who want to work on somebody love to say to you, oh, you're wrecked, your back is ruined, because they want to be more heroic when they heal you, as opposed to saying, hey, you know something? This isn't too bad. You're going to be fine. Obviously, I don't come out looking like the hero in that scenario nearly as well, but I don't have somebody leaving thinking, oh my God, I just went and saw blank, my massage therapist or my PT or whatever it was, and he said my knee is ruined or my back is ruined or my MRI is horrible. You know what I mean? There's all this stuff that we throw at people, and I think we can literally throw one or the other. And we have to be able to make sure that we realize that if we want somebody to get better, we don't want to fill them with negative thoughts and negative ideas and make them think about how bad they are, and then try to create that transition where we make them feel that they're better and that they're improving.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the questions I asked in the Q&A to Kevin, kind of a similar question, just in terms of, because even, and this is a good way to do it. Kevin was talking about 2 positive things for every negative thing, but that's almost like the John Wooden coaching.
Yep.
Do this, don't do that, do this. But when you're saying don't do that, not to say don't do this because that's a recipe for a knee injury. So it's like where we might have said certain things like that in the past, not thinking, don't do that, that'll hurt your back, or whatever. So we do have to be a little bit more conscious of maybe thinking about that. One of the things I was asking Kevin as well is, working with some of these people who feel like, almost like, all right, squats. I can't squat. Squats always hurt my knees. Or I can't single leg squat that, in your case, because that will hurt my knees. And, how do we get them away from that or build confidence? And obviously it's really through regressions, right? Exactly.
It's through regressions. It's through deloading. It's through, hey, try this way. I think this won't hurt. And again, sort of the essence of my Perform Better talk is just the idea that if you combine the idea of does it hurt with progressive resistance exercise, I think you can get anybody better. And that's one of the reasons I think we've had such huge success, is that we combine those 2 ideas.
Funny, that was my next. My next point was that, for how long have you been referring to your article, does it hurt, right? And it's the same thing. Okay, it hurts? Okay, we're not doing it. Let's go. Let's move on. And don't even really pay it any mind. We're not doing it right now. We'll move on. We don't sit there and talk about all these other, there's no maybe, there's no, well, it hurts when I do this or that. No. Does it hurt? Yes, it hurts. Okay, let's move on. Cool. Let's do this today. Here's what we're going to do.
Very much that, okay, you're not ready for this yet, and maybe we'll revisit that later. And that's one of those things that really, I think, helps people when you get that situation of someone thinking, oh, I couldn't do that at the beginning, now I can. And so it's very reinforcing for them when they realize that there were things they might come in. And as you said, it might be fear, it might be ideas that were put in their head by somebody else. It might be, it can be a badly written article. There's just so much stuff that people get exposed to. But I think the biggest thing is people wanting to be the hero in the story. And in order to be the hero in the story, I have to make everything worse than it seems, so that when it comes out good, I can seem better than it seems. And I think you have to be much more willing to kind of sit back and say, hey, I think you're going to be okay. I don't think this is that big a deal. Because they don't generally hear that. And I do think it is part of, there are people that are drawn to healing. And I think part of the reason they're drawn to healing is that they do like to cast themselves in that hero role. And so it's very much like play acting. Okay, I have to create this scenario where I'm going to make you think you're far worse than you really are, and I'm going to make you think that I'm far smarter and far more powerful than I really am. And then at the end, you're going to think you're so much better, and you're going to think I'm even that much better than before because I healed you even though you had, all your discs are crushed and your knee is bone on bone. I say to people, like, people tell me I'm bone on bone. I'm kind of like, what else is there? Like, do you have some stuff that I don't have? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you're bone on bone. And you start getting into the thought process of, hyaline cartilage. And when oh, my knee's bone on bone, I'm like, you've had both of your menisci removed? That's crazy. Like, no one has that happen to them. And then they're like, oh, my doctor said I'm bone on bone. And then I'm like, I always, you almost want to tweak him and be like, really? But, I'd love to talk to your doctor and see why would anybody take all of both meniscal cartilages out for that person. And of course, they didn't do that, right? What they really mean is that there's a small section where your meniscus is gone and now the bone ends are actually touching each other without that shock absorber, right? Yeah. But if you paint that picture versus this idea, oh, my knee's total bone on bone, I can't tell you how many people I have that conversation with about things like that. And it's almost, okay, I'm not going to waste my breath trying to explain to them that your doctor actually told you something that's not really true. And then you think about like the joint centration idea. If we can get your joint to centrate right, you may not have this bone-on-bone scenario anymore. You probably have the bone-on-bone scenario because your joint's not sitting the way that it's supposed to. And if we can simply do some flexibility work and do some strengthening work and change the orientation of that joint slightly, you may not have any more pain. But again, you're dealing with a pretty uneducated consumer, so that can be a struggle too.
Absolutely. Coach, let's stay on this injury idea. You wrote an article, The Plight of the Elite Fast Twitch Athlete, and you kind of proposed two theories that you really felt like you haven't read in the conventional literature. So give us a little profile of the athlete that you're talking about and talk about these two theories.
It's really interesting. Yeah, I thought that article would get a lot more play than it did, and it didn't. But it's the basic idea that this elite fast twitch athlete, the guy who we might see him probably in our coaching mind as the 100-meter sprinter, but in reality, as I said, he's probably your center fielder in baseball. He's probably your best forward in ice hockey. He's probably your best striker in soccer. They're all some variation of this very high fast twitch fiber guy. And the reality is this guy is, as we start to look at the research, we're showing that this guy is in fact different. And if you read, again, I alluded to some of the Charlie Francis stuff, you start thinking, this guy, if you've got this great nervous system, you probably don't have the ability to click it on and off in terms of when it comes to experiencing pain or discomfort or things like that. The same nervous system that allows you to have a vertical jump of 40 inches or it allows you to run the 4.240 probably also allows you to experience lots of other things in your body at a level that other people normally don't. And I kind of use the plow horse, racehorse analogy. And I think I had said in the article that I think we treat horses better than we do athletes in the sense that if you had, Seattle Slew or American Pharaoh or somebody like that, and someone came up and said, I think you really, one of the ways we're going to get him faster is we're going to use him to plow. That any horse trainer would be like, no way, buddy. There's no chance you're putting a plow on that horse. But yet we have no problem with taking this elite fast twitch athlete and trying to send him out for a distance run to develop their aerobic base. And then wondering why when they come back, they're hurt or they're more sore, and then they're angry, and then they're uncooperative. And we attribute all that to them being soft, lacking mental toughness, all these other things that we throw around in there. So I think it was just an article to say, hey, maybe these guys are really different. And here's a little bit of evidence, both some experiential and some scientific, to show that might in fact be true.
Yeah, it does make sense that, an elite athlete, or really almost, like when we say elite athlete, I would think almost any pro, just in terms of body awareness, knowing their body, knowing what they can do. And I think, like you said, these guys probably know, like you were talking about, listen to them. They know exactly what they feel, and they may say things like almost 100%. That really means they're not ready to go, and don't just kind of throw them back in here because these guys are telling you something.
Exactly. That's exactly the point that I think we were making in the article, is that these guys, and I've been around all these guys when you think about some of the guys that I've had a chance to train, whether it was Major League Baseball or whether it was soccer or whether it was ice hockey. And one of the things that I realized is almost all of these guys at some point during their career got accused of lacking mental toughness because they felt that they weren't ready to go. And I think that's something that we really have to look at and think, is that accurate? Or are we just looking at a much more highly evolved athlete?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we're looking at a highly evolved. I mean, obviously from, also from back in the day, quote unquote, right? I mean, because there's more training, more people know about their body, there's more information out there. So obviously, I feel like people are a little bit, like a lot, especially some of the younger athletes that I feel like these athletes know their body a little bit better than before.
Yeah, without question.
All right, good stuff, Coach. Well, thanks for coming on today, and that's going to do it. And talking about some injuries, so thanks for coming on with Skype. I'm hoping that this is a regular thing.
I'm going to try. Thanks. I appreciate it.
All right, Coach. All right, now it's time for the Ask the Equipment Experts with Perform Better, and I am here with the ultimate expert in functional training, rehabilitation, and sports performance equipment, Erin McGurr. Erin, how you doing?
Yes, I love the title. I am doing great.
Geez, sometimes I get a little carried away there.
Nothing wrong with that.
Let's go. We got to go with the sale first. What do we got?
Well, right now we are actually doing kind of a flash sale. It doesn't show up on our website, but what we are doing is there's a pop-up that'll come up, and there is a code that you can put in during checkout, and it is TrainHard15. And if you put TrainHard15, TrainHard is all in capital letters, then you will get 15% off your order. So again, it's kind of one of those secret sales that we're having, but when you go to the discount box, you can apply that code at the end, and you will get the discount.
Love it. TrainHard15. Very cool. What is the? We're going to talk to you next week pretty quick. I mean, I just talked to people about my little delay here in between podcasts, but we're back. What's the next one day?
The next one day is going to be March 18th in Boston. It's always a big one. And we have Eric Cressy and Brandon Marcello, Martin Rooney, and Mike Boyle. Those four guys will be presenting. Looking forward to it because it's the first time that Eric Cressy and Mike Boyle will be speaking for us this year. So looking forward to hearing them.
Very cool. Two local guys. All right. Let's talk about products. We got the Agility Trainer Pro that you wanted to talk about. Is this just like a glorified ladder? What do we got here?
It kind of is. I wanted to mention this. I know Chris and Rob are out at the Combine right now, so I just felt it was a little necessary to talk about a speed and agility product, especially a new one. So this year, new in the catalog, we have the Agility Trainer Pro. Like you said, it's kind of like a glorified agility ladder. It's kind of like an agility ladder and the rings combined. So it's actually, they're sold in a set of 10, and they are a trapezoid shape. And what makes them unique is that because of their trapezoid shape, you can actually set it up and do different drills with them that you can't with other different tools like a ladder, just by making more game-like movements. So one of the biggest things that I like about it is that you can make it into a circle or a semicircle. And I've done a lot of sports-specific drills with it. So you can do the basic ladder footwork, whether you're doing icky shuffle, in and out, different, footwork drills. But as you come out, you can incorporate a ball work. So instead of just using a regular ladder or some rings where you're going in a straight line, this actually allows you, depending on how you turn the trapezoid and how you set it up, to change direction and change shape a lot of different ways that you can't with some other tools. So that's really the main reason I like it. They're all individual pieces. You can still set them up really however you like and do some reaction drills with them. But when you do set it up, like I said, you can make a lot of curves with it, a lot of turns. So when you're doing sport-specific drills and sport-specific movements, you can really change direction a lot easier and make it a lot more interesting for your athletes.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. I like the way it's kind of a good bang for your buck product too, in terms of, for example, if you don't want to bring the cones out too outside because those separate, you can use them almost as cones or boundaries as well because they separate. Very cool. Thanks for coming on, talking about the Flash Sale Train Hard 15 and the one day's coming up in Boston. That thing always sells out. It's March 18th, and then the Agility Trainer Pro. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Hi, this is Dr. Kyle Kiesel with Functional Movement Systems, and welcome to the Functional Movement segment. What we're going to talk about is breathing, and this is one of three parts. Breathing has become such talked about and popular topic within both strength and conditioning and rehabilitation that we're going to take a closer look. We're going to cover sort of some background information today and give you why it's so important to consider breathing and breathing mechanics in your patients and clients. Then we'll go through really that intimate, in part two, the intimate relationship between core function and breathing. And then in part three, we'll talk about the details of our new course at Functional Movement Systems, all related to breathing and breathing dysfunction. So why breathing? Why is this so important? Well, we've known at Functional Movement Systems for a long time that intimate relationship between breathing problems and movement problems. And throughout my research, starting out my PhD training looking at core function, I was reading a lot about the core and running into things about breathing. At the same time, we were developing metrics to deal with movement, as you know, and we were realizing that these movement and breathing problems often go hand in hand. So in a discussion several years ago, Gray Cook said, hey, Kyle, spend a little time. I want you to dig into breathing, and let's figure out a way, essentially, to determine whether we should be working on movement dysfunction or breathing dysfunction first. And that seemed like a pretty simple question. And here we are 4 or 5 years later. When I got into the research on breathing and understanding it more and breathing dysfunction, we were really unpeeling this onion, and there was so much to learn. First thing that I want everyone to recognize and understand is when you get into the research looking at breathing, it's not just as simple as teaching someone to belly breathe and that's all you have to do. It's much more than that. And in fact, new research has shown that there is 3 distinct dimensions of breathing dysfunction, meaning there are 3 different categories, or almost think about it as having 3 different diagnoses of why someone is breathing inappropriately. And recognizing that there are these 3 different dimensions was a real important part for us as we move forward, because we can throw maybe an exercise program that will help a certain percentage at people, but there's always going to be those that fall out. So when we deal with a system, we need a system that has the ability to catch anybody. So it's really important that we recognize these 3 dimensions. Those 3 dimensions are one, what we just call the biomechanical dimension. And that's what most people think of. We're just breathing biomechanically in an unacceptable or not functional way. And the most common problem with that is an upper chest breather. That's typically what you'd see. You may hear the term apical breathing, or someone that's just not diaphragmatically breathing. That would be a biomechanical problem. The next category dimension would be a biochemical or biochemistry problem. This is when the breathing gases are off. So from a physiological perspective, breathing is less than ideal. The absolute best way to measure that would be an arterial blood gas. Of course, that's not something we're going to do in the clinic or in the gym, but there is a proxy measure for that we can capture how much CO2 you're blowing off in your exhaled air. And by measuring that through a pretty simple device known as a capnographer, we can determine if your physiological breathing is at least in some range. Sometimes people who are breathing biomechanically perfectly are not breathing physiologically appropriately. So that's the biochemistry category. And it is obviously a little more challenging to measure out in the clinic or out in the gym. And then the last category, you could be biomechanically fine, biochemistry fine, but you get in a certain situation, a psychosocial situation that creates a breathing challenge or a breathing problem. And a classic example is maybe someone that's been in a car accident. They've rehabbed, they're doing well, everything looks good. They get in their car, they clip on their seatbelt, and they get that anxiety and they start to breathe poorly. So that's what could be captured as a situational breather. So working with patients and clients, it's great to know which of those categories that you're in. So that's where we started our research to say, listen, I understand these three categories. Is there a way that we can capture each of those categories pretty quickly, clinically, and really looking at this from a screening, testing, and assessment perspective, just like we do with movement. In our next section, we will look at the intimate details of how core movement and breathing are detailed. And then the last section, we'll go right into the details of the new class, the breathing screen, the breathing assessment. For more information, check out functionalmovement.com.
Hey everybody, it's Rachel Cosgrove with the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment on the Strength Coach podcast. And for today's lesson, I want to talk about, how becoming an entrepreneur can be one of the toughest things you can do, becoming a business owner, deciding to open your own place. It's one of the toughest things that you could do, yet it's one of the most rewarding. And if you have decided to open your own business, to, embark on the journey of a fitness entrepreneur, congratulations, because, as Steve Jobs says, you're one of the crazy ones. You're one of the crazy ones who knows, and your mission is to change the world. You have an idea, you feel like you can change the world, and so you've decided to open your own gym or to set out on your own, on your own and open your own business. And so, yes, it's tough, yet it can be one of the most rewarding things you can do. So a few things that as you do head off on this journey that you want to think about that I see entrepreneurs, maybe don't realize. Number one, focus. Figure out what it is that you want your business to create. What is it that you want to offer? So really get that focus. That's one of those skills that you want to make sure you're good at. I think as entrepreneurs, we're excited about our idea. We're excited about changing the world. And so it's easy to get distracted and have what we call squirrels. So, if I have an idea and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a great idea. And I head off in one direction, and then I, have another idea and I want to head off in another direction. And pretty soon I'm all over the place. And so just making sure that before, you get too excited and you start with all these different ideas, that you really hone in and get focused. And then two, really, really getting great at organization and time management. As an entrepreneur, as you open your business, you're going to wear so many different hats. So it's really important to really get good at those skills of, being organized and time management. So focus, and then being organized and time management. And those are some of the things that really, as you become a business owner. And so it's shifting from, being a trainer, being a fitness professional, to becoming, CEO of your career, CEO of your business. And no matter if you open your own brick and mortar facility, or if, you're working out of another gym, or maybe you're in the park doing a boot camp, you still want to think of your career. You want to be the CEO of your career. So you got to shift your mindset from that, fitness, professional mindset to become that business owner, and really getting focused, really working on your time management, your organization. And one of the things I would say that I see, as people do decide they're going to open their own business, they're going to set off and, maybe get their own facility and run their own business, they stay in that, the personal trainer role and personal trainer mindset. And if you stay in that role and you keep, training your clients, and you don't actually ever step out of, that personal trainer role into the business owner role, you're never going to be able to grow your business. And it's going to continue to be a job, really, because you're only going to get paid if you're there. And so you're never going to be able to grow beyond that. And so I would just say, if you love training people, and if you love coaching people, as we all do, and if that's really, your passion and where you want to be, at this point, there's so many cool gyms that are opening, and we have 80 gyms in our Results Fitness University group that all would love great trainers. I would find a cool place to work. If that's really what you want to do, if you want to be on the floor coaching clients, which absolutely that's what we all love. Find a cool place to work instead of opening your own business. Because as I started off this podcast with, it's tough. Being an entrepreneur is tough. It's one of the most rewarding journeys you can go on, but it is tough. And so just make sure you're clear on that the fact that as you do open your business, you do need to shift from that personal trainer role to becoming a business owner and having that business owner mindset and focusing on the things that are going to make your business grow, and eventually stepping out of, being on the floor coaching clients, which can be hard and a hard transition, but that's the eventual goal as a business owner, is to be able to create something that's bigger than you, that's far beyond you. So just something to start thinking about, as if some of you that have that goal, have that vision of, I want to open my own business, or maybe you are opening your own business, that, long term, your main job is probably not going to be as a personal trainer, and that you pretty quickly need to start to shift from that personal trainer role into that business owner role and start to get some of those skills of a business owner. And those skills include really getting that focus, that organization, and that time management. And so think about those things as you open your business and be the CEO of your business and your career. So hopefully that gets you thinking a little differently. Again, this is the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. And we check out resultsfitnessuniversity.com. We do have a mentorship coming up in March, so we would love to see you out there. It's probably getting sold out by now, but check out resultsfitnessuniversity.com to see if we have any spaces left. And it's a 2-day course out at Results Fitness with us, and we'd love to see you. So again, resultsfitnessuniversity.com.
All right, now it's time for the Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach. And today I have on Brett Bartholomew, and Brett is the owner of Bartholomew Strength. And he's been doing a lot of consulting with teams. You can find out more at bartholomewstrength.com to see what he's doing. But I'm not going to get too much into a bio here. We just had him on the Stopping Gimme 20 podcast. Great stuff there, talking about Brett's story. So I highly recommend you check that out. But I wanted to get Brett on today to talk about his new book, Conscious Coaching, and it's everybody is really looking forward to this. So I was really excited to get him on and kind of go over the book. So Brett, thanks so much for coming on today.
No, it's always good talking to you. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Well, let's get into this conscious coaching. Lots of people are lots of interest on social media. There's a lot of, and we're going to talk more about some of the other people that you included in this, but I want to talk about, I thought this was a good way to start, what this book is not, because I think we have this, we're going to always go in when we see a title of a book or something, or we all know you in the industry, and we're going to think, oh, cool, this is going to be a book on. So tell us what this book is not going to be about.
Yeah, no, and I did a post to that effect not too long ago, because I think, when I first started off, I remember sometimes when people would sell products or books and you'd get the typical blast email. I feel like people always kind of people must have hired like the same business coach or what have you, or because I'd always get the same template. Like somebody would release a DVD and then somebody would release a book, and it always kind of had the same layout. And this product, I mean, you would think this thing solved the world's problems. And I get it. It's salesmanship, but that never really resonated with me. And more often than not, I'd delete it just because when things seem too good to be true or act like they can fix everything, it's usually a load of bullshit. So one of the things I've always wanted to do is, if I had a product or anything I contributed, is just say, hey, this is what it isn't. And I think to go down the list, I put this on Instagram, is, this book, despite how it could be perceived from somebody that maybe doesn't know me or hasn't heard of me or anything like that, is not inspirational jargon. It's not filled with idealist views or motivational, type stuff, like anything that's kind of warm, fuzzy, and overly compassionate. It's not filled with examples that, are really esoteric or what you would think from a typical like keyboard desk jockey, somebody that clearly hasn't been in a disagreement with an athlete, a disagreement with somebody with administration, or just found themselves in unique situations where they're trying to figure out what's the power dynamic here, what's the hierarchical struggle. It's not something that gives perspective without practice, meaning that, I'm not going to give you a bunch of tips, nor the other contributors in the book that aren't followed up with a tangible example, because that's pretty tough too, right? Like, you'll get an abstract response to something, or even like a fortune cookie type piece of advice, and then the author almost kind of leaves it up to you to decide what that means. We really try to be as practical as possible, which is part of the reason the book took so long. Is there were some times where it just wasn't specific enough. Definitely not claims that it's going to fix all issues. I try to make it very clear in the book that this is a version 1. These are thoughts and stories that will change over time. Writing isn't even really my forte. That's why you don't see me blog. That's why you don't see me do a lot of those kinds of things. And unless I really have something I'm passionate about, that's not that there's anything wrong with that. It's just not, I very much enjoy interacting with people one-on-one, on the floor if a coach comes and visits, or, speaking and presenting when it can kind of be more real time, almost freestyle, because I feel like you get a little bit more authenticity and less BS there. And then this is also something that, doesn't offer exposure without experience, which is something that I talked about, I think, in the Stop and Give Me 20, where exposure is always filled with observations or things that you can kind of study and write down, but doesn't really give you something tangible that, happened within the moment. When you look at exposure, it's like the movie Sully, right? If you've seen that, and if you haven't, you should watch it, because it's definitely a coaching movie. If you read between the lines, there's a part where, they're doing these simulations and they're asking him, or they're telling him, you had enough gas and altitude to actually land this plane on a runway. And, he watches, and listens to their thousands and thousands of simulations. And he says, that's all well and good, but you guys forgot the human element. And the human element comes from the fact that when something hits you, like in a training standpoint, when there's an issue with an athlete, where there's an issue with administration, when there's an issue with a coworker, what have you, there's a latency period. There's a translational gap where you have to decide, how am I going to respond to this, rather than just react to it? And then you make that decision. So things don't happen automatically in real time. And it was funny. That's actually what got Sully in the movie acquitted of all that, is when he said, hey, you need to institute a 15 or 30-second delay. I can't remember what it was. You'll see that, we weren't equipped for this, and we didn't have time, and they did it. And then they showed, you didn't have enough fuel. You didn't have enough resources to kind of get back to where you were. And you're right. So the book just tries to be a no bullshit example of an account of things that you may encounter when you're coaching, things that I certainly encountered. Because again, I know I'm relatively young in the eyes of many viewers, but dense and diverse experience. A lot was thrown at me pretty early. And so that was a lot of opportunities to kind of become an old soul in this field, because it seemed like every other week, every other month, you were kind of put in a new situation that accelerated your learning. So yeah, it's not going to fix everybody's problems. Hopefully it stimulates more conversations than anything else. But I'll put it this way, I think we can all find a million books to read about with training. I don't know that we can find very many that help us, at least in our field, navigate the dynamic environments, socially and hierarchically that we deal with.
Absolutely. I think that's why you see how much we look to all of these other authors in business and self-help, right? I think we see all of those other fields looking at these things, and I think a lot of coaches have tried to, look for these things because we haven't found it yet. And I think what your answer to that question, which was, it depends, right? It's always that answer that I think a lot of people don't want to hear, but the more experienced a coach is, the more he has that answer. It depends, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, and you won't get that in the book, right? The book will give you a playbook. It'll give you an audible. It'll go through reactive conflict management strategies, which are things that you can fall back on after a major conflict, either with an athlete or administrator, what have you, depending on your setting has occurred. It'll give you proactive conflict management strategies. So, everything from, what I always call onset to encore, from how you frame things up to people that you're working with or the athletes, to how you communicate expectations, and all these pieces, what you can do to kind of put yourself in a position, no different than like movement prep is, right? Like we have to put our athletes in positions to be successful within the training session. This is something that, good, bad, or indifferent, me and the other contributors here have tried giving you options of how to deal with everything, from the worst situations to ones that are relatively stable. I really get into helping people, learn about what are called, bright and dark side traits of leadership, because I don't know if you felt the same way, but reading books, especially when you come in and you start reading, leadership books or all these kind of self-improvement books as a younger coach, and even later on in your career, you kind of get inundated with this kind of warm view of leadership that we're all just supposed to be, these guides, and, we need to manage our temper and our ego, and, we need to make sure that we're just straight shooters through and through. Like, it almost just makes you think the ideal of a coach is still that guy that wears, socks up to his shins, high and tight pants that are tucked in shirt and a clipboard, and thinks everything's going to be ideal, when in reality, dark-sided traits and dark-sided behaviors, in other words, sometimes being a dick strategically, or, even understanding how to navigate and manipulate different social situations, especially when dealing with athletes, that may be millionaires or maybe top of the food chain type athletes, or maybe, all kinds of different personalities, can be much more effective than just that kind of blue collar version of what a coach is, So we try to dig into everything pretty deep here, and none of it is without research backing.
Absolutely. Well, let's actually segue that into kind of what I would call the conscious coach avatar, because you were talking about in your intro, there is a wide variety. The spectrum is wide when we look at strength and conditioning coaches and who we're getting our information from. There is, certain coaches that are, snake oil salesmen. There's certainly just the research guys who don't really train anybody. Then there's the people that train anybody that do train a lot of people and only rely on kind of research, and they don't really take into account some of the personality. So give us this coaching, this conscious coach avatar. What is where does that person fall?
In terms of where did the idea for this come, or where does the conscious coach reside?
Yeah, where does the conscious coach reside?
Yeah, so I mean, listen, to put it simply, and this is something I've challenged myself to do in order to not be so verbose the past few years, is I try to think, just like they say a good elevator pitch should have, one word or one sentence. You look at a conscious coach like somebody like Al Vermeil, a Mike Boyle. I look at a Dan Paff, Stu McMillan, as I've gotten to know him. Even guys, more locally out here in LA, like Mark Fitzgerald for the Ducks, Matt Price, Matt Jordan up in Calgary. You look at, and there's plenty more, right? Like I always think our mutual friend Dave Paloka is a great example of this.
Yeah.
And you could kind of go through your Rolodex. The bottom line is what differentiates a conscious coach from everybody else is they have a 360-degree understanding of how to not only put programs together, but how to interact with athletes. So it's the same kind of thing that went into the logo for, my kind of company. It's just 3 parallel lines. It's nothing fancy. All those lines stand for is, listen, you've got to have a grasp on the physiological, the psychological, and the cultural aspects of human performance. And that just came from the fact that I kind of get tired of seeing coaches label themselves as speed guys or weight room guys or multi-directional guys. I just always think that if we're performance coaches, which I think is the right term, strength and conditioning works fine too. I use them interchangeably within the book, but there's got to be a holistic mindset. I just kind of get tired of seeing people pocket themselves in these niches. And that's cool if you have an interest, but don't classify yourself as a guy. Like nobody's just a kettlebell guy, right? Like you should have a balanced perspective on all this. Otherwise, how do you know how to optimize performance in a balanced manner for these athletes? So it's just my way of saying, hey, people would call it a master coach, but I make a distinction in the book that I don't think any of us are going to become a master. I think you could ask whoever views themselves to be one of the best coaches in the world or the most knowledgeable. And, if they're a good person and they're honest, they're still going to tell you they make mistakes. So that by default, you're not a master coach, right? But what you can be is just conscious. You're aware of different things that may exist, different tools in the toolbox. You know how to implement them. You know how to pull them out. You know when to adjust a session, when to cleave off a set. You know when to get a little bit more hard-nosed with an athlete. You know when to back off with an athlete. Like just this overall idea of kind of the middle, right? And I think that just isn't sexy because being in the middle isn't that spectral or pendulum-like thing, and it's not marketable. So I just felt like, you know what, nobody else kind of wants to be a middle. Everybody wants to classify themselves as this, that, or the other. I'm okay being both. I've considered doing my own facility. And, when people say, well, what would be the build out? Are you more of a movement guy or a strength guy? I just kind of look at them and I say both. Like, you better believe I'm going to try to periodize the best I can, but still get on the turf and get after it and look at postures, positions, and all these things with the same kind of ideology. So that's the avatar, just somebody that gets it. And, if you were going to get in a conversation with them about their philosophy, that, it would be a wide spectrum, and you just know that they can be an artist as opposed to a painter.
Absolutely. Great answer. I want you to go into your our first introduction to each other was when you were at Athletes Performance, Exos, and you were part of the Art of Coaching. And talk to me about how this is different than the Art of Coaching, or what's not the problem. I mean, we don't want to say always the problem with the Art of Coaching, but where, because again, with the pendulum swinging, I think some people might misuse that term now. Talk to us about how this differs from the Art of Coaching.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to bust your balls here real quick, because the first time we actually interacted is I was a graduate assistant at Southern Illinois, and I sent you an email. I'd listen to the show all the time because my girlfriend lived about an hour out, and so I'd always have to drive super early in the morning to kind of make it set up for football and what have you. And I'd always listen to the show, and I was like, you know what? I wonder if I could get on this and just talk and learn. So I sent you an email, and thank God you didn't put me on, because as a graduate assistant, right? Like that would have been, you would have been like, cool, man. All right. Talk to you later. But no, I think, to go back to your question, and now that I took that brief aside, I'm trying to remember. Oh, yeah, nothing's wrong with the Art of Coaching. You and I talked about this before the show. My goal with this isn't to say, hey, here's a new paradigm. Follow this, and don't call it the Art of Coaching anymore. This is just my way of saying, hey, you know what? Let's be a little bit more specific with that term. Just like if I asked you, hey, what's your definition of what heavy strength training is? Like, give me an actual percentage range, right? Like if I was interviewing somebody for a role or talking shop, just so that we can develop the appropriate context. I always just think, what does that mean? Could you kind of see this catch-all garbage kind of framework of, yeah, all these things just get put under this umbrella if we can't objectively measure it as the Art of Coaching. And so what I say is, to me, the Art of Coaching is the art of communicating. That's what it comes down to, whether that's nonverbal, whether that's verbal. Art of coaching is the art of communicating, and you could throw logistics in there as well. And it's also wrong that these things can't be measured. I get this again and again and again, and I'm not trying to be defensive about it. I'm more so just trying to help people understand that information, objective information and research about communication, about influence, about persuasion is out there. I mean, you have people this is how people understand where to spend their advertising dollars and marketing campaigns. They understand what gets the most views, what gets the most engagement. And then from that, they dissect via questionnaires and other kinds of, research-oriented examples of why did people respond this way. And whether you want to read Daniel Kahneman's work in Thinking Fast and Slow, Robert Cialdini's work down at Arizona State University and his numerous books, Daniel Pink, Adam Grant, Timothy Judge, when it comes to bright and dark-sided leadership traits. I'm not sure. The only thing I have a problem with is I'm not sure where all this talk about these things not being objective comes from. And more often than not, it's usually right now, and I'm not trying to point fingers, but it's just true. It's usually team-sided guys that are just saying, well, how do I know if I'm getting better buy-in? Well, what do you mean? If your guys are listening to what you're doing and training with increased intent, and they give a shit about the program, and they're reacting well to you, and they're giving you good feedback, by and large, what you're doing is probably working. And you may not need this book, you may not need anything else, but you should at least excavate what you're doing. Every great culture has great messaging behind it, because it's not just what you say so much as how you say it or how you frame it. That leads to that kind of very similar to eccentric work, right? That absorption that we're looking at. But this stuff can be objectively measured. You also kind of get well, I don't have time for that. And I said this recently at a conference, like I've been in the team setting, granted I'm not there right now, but I'm not training one-on-one. I'll have some clients in the morning super early morning that I'll do that or what have you. But there are private sector people all over the world that create a business off of having people come in and training groups and them believing it, and you've got to look at this as, you can't say as a strength and conditioning coach, and Anthony, I know you've heard this a million times, where we're like, hey, we spend more time with them than any other coach, right? Like, we're the head coach pretty much year round when nobody else can spend time with them. Well, then how are you saying you don't have time, right? Like when I was at Southern Illinois or Nebraska, in between while somebody's resting and you coach them up, you say, hey, chest down, make sure neutral spine, get this locked in. You watch their set. Nice. You feel the difference there? Okay, what did I say that made a difference to you? Boom. He gives you a nugget of information. You leave with it. Right now you have some kind of relational framework to be able to come back and cue them up. During warm up, when you're sitting there looking at their form, you're asking them how they're feeling, how they slept. Like, there's so many opportunities to spread conversational currency, but you would think from some of the responses that you get from people that if you were to walk into any weight room in the country, there is nothing but just straight faces, no talking other than nice, good set, next rep, all these kinds of things. Yeah. And so you kind of have to just be careful as a strength coach of at one point pounding your chest and saying we spend more time than anybody else. And then on the next time being like, well, I don't have the time to get to know my athletes. I don't understand how that works.
Yeah, what's funny is a lot of those same people are the ones who are doing like a questionnaire, like even like a 5-question questionnaire to do some of the monitoring. Yeah. And there's your opening right there, because you just said, like, how was your sleep? And, all of you had these great 5 questions that you can find why didn't you have a good sleep? Oh, really? What's going on with your spouse or whatever?
Right. Boom. Yeah, exactly. You have peace right there. And that's why, when I was at API and we were getting super large groups towards the end there of NFL offseason, there was just a lot of things we were doing with NFLPA and what have you. I created a Google questionnaire, and it was just a familiarized response is what I called it. And so it was 5 questions, and they were all kind of differentiated in terms of their format so that you couldn't say, well, you've led them into that choice and all these kinds of things. And some of them were as simple as, what resonated with the session? What part of the session did you like most and why? And some of the answers or options were like, hey, I really like learning details and nuances of technique. Others were, I love competitive aspects of performance. Others were, I'm a kinesthetic learner. I loved the repetition and the repetition of this, and that we didn't do too many drills, but rather focused on a few pointed ones. So all of a sudden you start categorizing, people that want to learn, people that want to defend or compete, people that want to do all these different things at different levels, because every athlete is a mix, but you start getting a personality profile. So I started using this information, and Google, all these guys had to do is pull it from their phone and select 3 or 5, even, who is your favorite coach, irrespective of strength coach or what have you, and why. You'll be surprised at what athletes give you. You just can't ask them probing weird nonsense until you have a relationship with them, but just ask them what resonated with the session. It's no different than how was your sleep, how's your nutrition. You're just asking them things about their perception, their reaction, and their preference, and you blend that in. And so these personality profiles that I'd start creating, and they're not intricate, right? If I sent you a spreadsheet, you're not looking at something that is, a pivot table and replete with graphs and charts. This was just raw data collection at this point. But I was looking at people that were only children, where were you from? East St. Louis, rural Iowa, all these different things. And it wasn't any harder to gather or capture than jump profiling or anything like that, or writing their weights down in their cards. You just have to kind of finesse these things. Dan Paff talks about that all the time, right? Like, and Altus trains a tremendous group of athletes. He just says the warm-up is my most valuable time to kind of check in with everybody. So I don't know. I don't know what leads to that, to be honest. I think it's a little bit of follow the leader. Like, I think some people that this stuff just isn't interesting to them. They'd rather just look at data that they're comfortable with and research that they're comfortable with. So they kind of want to fight it. I think that's human nature. But if you want to learn the information and how to be more effective as a communicator and an influencer, it's out there.
Absolutely. Good stuff. It reminds me, I saw a lecture a couple of years ago. Claude Harmon was talking about different profiles. You know, his dad had worked with some of the best golfers, Tiger Woods included, and he was just saying some guys, because there's so much data now, data collection in golf, that they were talking about. There's some guys that want to know every last detail, what angle their pinky was at, what height and when, and some guys that absolutely do not want to know any of that. And then there's the guy in the middle who basically says he wants to know what the results were, but not too technical. And that's
No doubt.
where, so, you know, like there's all these different personalities, and it's why I think in golf, or Titleist really has done a thing where they've gone away from method. You know, they really don't. They're like, listen, learn all the methods, because everybody's body's different, everybody reacts differently, everybody was taught differently. So don't go with one way. It depends.
And I think, yeah, to that point, and that's even, you know, that was another kind of impetus into this. So I think it was 2008 or 2009, I wrote a short blurb on Coach Boyle's site, The Talking in Color, where I was just kind of introducing the research I was doing at the time with attentional focus, with, you know, because I had met Dr. Jared Porter at Southern Illinois, who was a direct disciple of Gabrielle Wolf. And then, you know, I'd gone out to Arizona and talked to Nick about those kinds of things. And Nick and I had good discussion, and he's done tremendous work in that space. But for me, it wasn't enough. I wanted to dive deeper as to, okay, well, why did this cueing matter, right? Because that's great to know that external more than internal in these situational pieces, but what was it beyond the constrained action hypothesis? What was it beyond, you know, limiting factors of attention? What was it, despite these competing resources and things like that, these relational frameworks that made this stuff great? So I wanted to excavate that a little bit deeper and say, all right, I want to study human nature, and I want to go pretty deep into it. I want to know why we are the way we are, no different than, you know, a physiologist wants to look into the deepest details regarding epigenetics, muscle fibers, and what have you, you know, and you just kind of look at where there's a need. I think when you and I first started talking when I was at Exos, and like if you followed me on social media early on, everything was about programming, everything was about, you know, plyometrics, strength power frameworks, what have you. And then you just start seeing everybody else start talking about those things in great detail already. And I don't want to be an echo like that. I'll echo and support all those things, because that's awesome that they're doing that. But it's a goal of mine. Like, this field saved my life, and I want to leave some contribution. So I want to do something that, you know, if that part of it's taken care of, and I'll still lend my voice to it. I still speak on that a lot. Obviously, it's still a passion, but I wanted to find a different way that I might be able to contribute. And some people may really value this, and some people may not give a shit. But the bottom line is, you know, I wanted to feel like at the end of the day, when my head hit the pillow, that I did something to at least help coaches that felt like, man, I'm kind of looking for something different than just training, you know, like, because now you get hit over the head with it, right? Like, there's so many online education platforms, there's so many books, there's so many. I feel like every day I get like an NSCA publish ahead of print notification, and that stuff, you know, you've got to filter that, but nothing's coming at me in terms of actual validated research or things like that from the connection and communication standpoint. And you know, so that I just want to kind of contribute in a space that I feel like I might be able to add where something's lacking. One thing that was funny is, you know, we were talking one time and somebody made a statement that they were like, yeah, but this stuff's pretty new. I don't know about the research, and none of it is new. You know, one point I put in the book is the study of effective communication spans nearly 5,000 years. So in Egypt, the classics like the precepts date back to, you know, 2675 BC. We have entire academic departments in universities dedicated towards communication, influence, and behavioral science. So if there's any point I hope to drive home, it's just that the art of coaching is really the science of connecting. Like, quit using these terms like it's just some soft fluff skill. I think that's probably just because the books that have been written about it maybe haven't addressed it from that standpoint, but they're out there. And for anybody that, you know, hopes to find those, hopefully some of the resources in the book point you towards some of that.
Good stuff. Well, let's just go general right now, because I think this is a unique book also in terms of, I mean, we've seen books where they've had other coaches contribute. David Joyce's book is one of them, High Performance Training for Sports. But this is a little different, because this really, all right, you have the sections where you talk about the athlete archetypes with all of your guest coaches contributing, but you also have a whole thing about your story, etc. Give us just an overview breakdown of what this book looks like.
Yeah, so the overview I wanted to make, so it kind of followed an intuitive, conversational, almost methodological approach, meaning like, where did this come from? So the book, and I'm looking at the table of contents right now just so I can make it, sure I hit every single thing. The book kind of goes, from the foreword. So Coach Dan Paff kind of talking about, why he thinks a book like this was needed. And he's been in it over 40 years. So I kind of wanted somebody that, if this was all bullshit, would have called me on it, because he's seen pretty much all of it. And I wanted his take. What did he learn from after working with all these institutions and all these Olympians and supporting all these organizations? Like, his voice was needed because he found that these things were a limiting factor for him early on. Then it goes to the introduction as to, my view as to why this was written or needed, and kind of the pieces there. Chapter 1 is about, it's called Maps and Meanings. So that's just kind of laying out the context and the framework and the verbiage, so everybody kind of knows, hey, why the term buy-in, why the term conscious coaching, what comprises this. So giving everybody kind of a skeleton and anatomical definition to go off of. The next section is about knowing yourself, and not knowing yourself as in like, hey, deeply reflect, think about all the positive things, but literally tools to kind of excavate your own, performance profile from a communication standpoint. So good traits, bad traits, why those things may be good, bad, indifferent, where your kind of coaching drives come from, where your coaching style comes from. More importantly, the dangers of not identifying a coaching style and just kind of following whoever you learned under. More importantly, just how to take traits of your personality and leverage that into a style of communication and coaching that's really effective and authentic. I think that's the most simple way, because I think there's a lot of follow the leader. People may look at different coaches that have a following, or different coaches that are quote unquote popular or in vogue or what have you, and they're like, oh, I want to be that guy. And it just kind of talks about the dangers of doing that. And it gives examples of, if you do this, listen, these 5 things or so are going to happen, and your athletes are going to sniff out the bullshit way before. And I taught a lot of my mistakes. So things that I tried doing when I was young in the game, and how I tried to overcompensate, fearing that people would look at my age and correlate that with inexperience. And that's the classic example of trying to talk about people's heads. You'd get in front of your groups and tell them every detail and nuance of every exercise. You're just kind of regurgitating everything and vomiting all over them, as opposed to actually, just being an effective coach and guiding and keeping the session flowing and saying what you need to. So it talks about the importance of knowing yourself. And this is kind of the Sun Tzu framework too, right? You have to know yourself, then you have to know thy enemy. Obviously, athletes aren't the enemy in this standpoint, but that same framework of, if you don't know yourself as a general, a manager, a coach, a leader, you're not going to have any idea of how to connect with your core audience. The next part of that then is essentially know the athletes, so seek to understand. And I attack this from a human nature standpoint. So everything in this is about the science of human conflict, why we behave the way we do when we're threatened, when we're insecure, all these kinds of pieces, what we can do when we face athletes that we're going to have conflict with, whether it's somebody not listening to us, somebody kind of abusing the autonomy we may give them within the section, somebody just not being adherent or buying in general, and poisoning the well for other athletes. It also goes into the science of first impressions. So, I know we as coaches think that we know it all, and that we're these beacons of almost a Superman persona of, we're these great educators, listen up, follow the path, pound the rock. But the reality is, you need to understand how other people perceive you and what you may be doing to basically have your athletes tune you out at the beginning, and how you can not be more empathetic, but just, really be able to be more compassionate as well to that point of view, and saying, hey, an 18 to 22-year-old kid isn't going to see you in the same manner that you see yourself. So just like a volume knob, you need to understand which aspects of your personality to turn up at what times, and again, what the research says about those things. It also talks about something that coaches, I think, a lot can struggle with, imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon, and what kind of drives this culture that we have, where you have coaches that are always trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? Whether that's kind of getting in a battle of, oh, is my program the best? Or, can we make the best video on Strength Performance Network? And how are my PowerPoint presentations? And how's all these things? And how do I stack up to the staff in the next state or what have you? And why that stuff is really just kind of pointless and where it comes from. And more importantly, how that can then infect your own training environment, your own leadership model, and pieces like that. So the human nature piece of chapter 3 just talks about how kind of silly we are as human beings, but how understanding the nuances of what drives that behavior and those perceptions and being better aware of them helps us better steer the ship and manage that internal and external conflict and how it may poison the well. And that's when, to your point, Anthony, I go into, all right, now that we understand conflict, internal and external, how can we leverage what are called bright and dark-sided behaviors and traits that we have as a coach? And then how does that fit within the archetypes that we're going to deal with? And the archetypes is a chapter, as you mentioned, that I had 15, 16 other coaches kind of contribute to.
Well, let's go a little deeper into that, because that's kind of interesting. And I would actually, let's talk about the process first. Did you just send them, hey, here's some things I want you to maybe talk about, or and then did you have to like approve them and like put them? That must have been a pretty tough part. You got 15 people. How did that work out?
Yeah, the process was, I'll remove the veil real quick. The process was kind of discombobulated on my end because, you're kind of trying to come up with these names that you feel at the time are not, and I say it in the book, all the names when people read it will be contentious. People might think of a better name. People might think of a name they don't like. That's all okay, right? Like my point wasn't to come up with the end all be all names, just kind of how I view them. And they may change over time if I do a volume 2 and volume 3 and what have you. But what I do is I basically would reach out to, I'd write down some people. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people I would have loved to have involved that didn't make it into the book, either because of time constraints on their end or, just, at the end of the day when the editor and I were going over some things, something didn't fit. So there were probably about 5 other authors that could have been in it, and I love them to death, and it stunk, but we're going to try to re-up for volume 2. So what I would do is say, hey, I'm doing this piece in the book. It's a sub-chapter in the book. Just like we look at different adaptational qualities, strength, power, hypertrophy, all these pieces, I want to look at how we adapt to different personalities. And here's a list of what I'm thinking in kind of a brief, I would say it was probably 3 to 4 sentence overview of what that looks like. Would you mind sharing a story? And then if they said yes or no, I'd kind of say, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write a more thorough overview, then look at strengths and weaknesses, because you need to be able, as a coach, again, just like performance testing, we need to know how to identify imbalances, asymmetries, any kinds of trend in regards to decrements or enhancements in performance. You need to be able to identify these traits. Like ideally, if a coach watches this, they should be able to scan their weight room and say, man, yeah, this guy kind of fits into that a little bit, and this guy fits into this piece. And that girl over there is kind of a combination of both of them. So I gave them a strengths, a weaknesses, a little bit of a framework as to how to connect, meaning within this personality, there's going to be certain things you absolutely don't want to do and absolutely probably want to steer a little bit closer towards. Now, coach, use David Joyce or Dave Paloka or Brian Mann. Give me an example of when you met an athlete like that and what exactly you did with them. And I just told them, right? Most of them got it right off the bat. They're all far smarter than I am. But I just said, this cannot be something that a coach can't look at and clearly walk away. They've got to walk away with at least 3 things. So please share not what you did that was successful, but also share where you messed up. Where did you stumble along the way? What's something that these guys should be aware of? Because just like we know, if we want to affect hypertrophy, by and large, we're not going to go, you're not going to hit the 1 to 3 rep range. Again, unless we're doing cluster training. I know there's always some literal Larry listening to the podcast. You can equate volumes and loads, I know, but by and large, you're going to stick to certain kind of recipes. And I want to make sure that people have a recipe to attack this kind, not attack, you know what I mean, connect with these kinds of personalities as well. And so they'd send me something, I'd read it, And, I'd kind of give feedback here or there, and I try to be accepting of their perspective. And if it wasn't really complete, maybe I'd add a little piece or try to be more complete on my end to steer them a little bit better. But by and large, nearly everybody knocked it out of the park. We just had to shorten some of them. And there were some times where you just had to edit here and there. But guys were really great about it. And I didn't, how everybody's schedule is. Like I was writing this between 11 p.m. at night and 2 in the morning most nights. And so guys would get back to me and you just kind of plug and play. So it was a lot of fun. And I cannot be thankful enough that these guys, and I know Barry Solon is a mutual friend as well. Wait till you read his piece. His piece is awesome.
Very cool. Can you give us an example of some of these different archetypes, though? Give us so we can get an idea of what you're talking about.
Yeah. I'll go down the names, and then if a couple of them, hit with you, I'll go more in depth. So the names, and don't worry about if you're listening to this, writing them down. Just my Instagram's got a picture of all of them laid out. And then there's also a thing that shows which author did what. So the technician, the royal, the soldier, the specialist, the politician, the novice, the leader, the self-sabotager, the mouthpiece. That's another good one. Kyle Holland killed that. The Wolverine, the free spirit, the manipulator, the underdog, the crusader, and the skeptic. So that's a full list of the ones that made it in the book. There were some others. There were some others that I definitely would have liked to include, but we'll do that for version 2.
Very cool. Give us go a little deeper with the mouthpiece. Like, you've set it up like that. I gotta ask a little bit more about Kyle's piece. Yeah.
So the mouthpiece is kind of that, class clown kind of individual, right? They're the ones that they always seek to be noticed, as opposed to, the politician, which Dave Paloka did, which is, somebody that only wants to be noticed when it benefits them. So the mouthpiece is kind of that ever distracting force. Every strength and conditioning coach, I guess I can't speak in absolutes, nearly every strength and conditioning coach who's worked in either the team or the private sides encountered one, right? They have this inexorable determination to be heard or seen at all times. Yeah. And so it makes them easy to identify. There's always kind of this incessant chatter, and they can have undertones of either positivity or negativity to being downright useless with just the crap that they do. But they can also shine in certain environments and situations through kind of heightening that natural energy of the locker room, weight room, practice field. They kind of get guys hyped, because these guys that are always kind of chirping, there's some days where the team leaders and other people just don't want to hear it. But other times they kind of just, again, they have that energy that really gets them going. So, and I'll give you a little bit of a breakdown. Weaknesses, I say many times the mouthpiece struggles to focus. No matter the amount of wind that comes out of their mouth, it usually doesn't really point the ship's sails in any right direction. They always just kind of act like nothing bothers me, or nothing's really a challenge, like I got this kind of persona. And when I talk to young coaches or other coaches about how I can always or typically identify that, they usually just present themselves as kind of a narcissistic presence. But the reality is when you usually dive deep, it's usually a guise for insecurity, uncertainty. It's a segue for, kind of repeated mental mistakes. They can always kind of default into their, sorry for my language, but shit talking, and you look at kind of more loquacious legends that fit into that space. People like Muhammad Ali, Floyd Mayweather, Terrell Owens from the NFL, those are kind of those athletes where, that's a part of their mental game, but it's a part of their physical game as well. And it's funny because you look at some research and it says that the time and mental effort required for trash talk and kind of getting themselves on that level is usually, unless they're skilled, genetically and technically, as the athletes I just mentioned, that usually kind of backfires on them and distracts them because they're so worried about the perception around them. So, one thing I say is, to connect with them, even if you're more of the introverted and reserved type or an old school coach that kind of, channels that Clint Eastwood, Gran Torino persona, you do have to understand that there's other athletes we're going to interact with that's not like us. And if you want to lead a group of individuals, let alone bring the best out of any of them, we kind of have to figure out a way to play into their persona a little bit by knowing where to draw that line. And sometimes that's just listen, you can do all kinds of different things with your programming. They're great in competitions. Just being able to keep the information and the objective feedback, whether that's a Kaiser power number, looking at force velocity models or velocity-based training, it kind of puts the mouthpiece in their place, because then they kind of got to rise up or shut up with it. So, there's lots of ways that you can kind of get into that I get in with the book. And Kyle did an awesome part. I think he was hearkening back to, his time at Boyles, and when he was working with a group of, NHL players in particular, and just the things that he kind of dealt with as a young coach, and a mouthpiece that was calling him out, and how he was able to kind of get that respect from him, but also kind of, flip it on him so he still got the respect of the group. So it was just really good from Kyle's standpoint of saying, hey, like, I understood that this guy wanted me to pay attention to him. I learned how to not sweat that and become too distracted or disappointed by it. And I actually have a couple things I'll teach you, all being Kyle's perspective, where you can flip it and kind of use it to your benefit. So cool. I think that's what's fun. And I wanted to include these other coaches in here because nobody wants to just hear from me, and not only that, I thought what David Joyce did was really inspiring from the standpoint that we already have enough divisive stuff within this industry. So to bring 15 other people from different countries, different sports, different backgrounds, different genders. Jennifer Noyles is in there from Exos, who is one of the best coaches nobody knows about because she just stays, I don't know, she's just a workaholic. I love her to death. But I wanted all of that represented to say, hey, we deal with far more similarities than we do differences. So cue the Michael Jackson, "We Are the World" piece. But it is true. The industry could use a little bit more of that aside from this constant kind of attack nonsense.
What's funny is I think just listening to some of those types is even if you work with General Pop, you're probably gonna recognize a lot of the same personalities. So it would be useful as well.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's a piece of it as well. This was a book about human performance. That's the thing. And however you want to classify that. So people that are in private sector or, even personal trainers, what have you, people that train Gen Pop, this fits right in with that. We're talking about a human issue. We're not talking about an athlete issue. It's just different applications. But when I went through these examples, I tried to make it specific enough that everybody's got a playbook, but general enough that nobody ever would think that this was written just for athletes. If I did my job, this can be used from corporate and, military. And that was kind of the blurbs on the back of the book. Bob Alejo was kind enough to give one from an athletic director, strength and conditioning director, team setting approach, Lieutenant Colonel Rob Bollinger, full colonel, he'd hit me for saying that, who's a gentleman that I've known and worked with within the United States Special Forces. He's a 24-year veteran. He wrote a piece about it and how, it takes place there. And then Patrick Chung, who just won his second Super Bowl with the Patriots from an athlete perspective. I sent him that. And then, you've got Dave Tenney and you've got Brandon Marcello. You've got all these guys that I wanted to reach out and say, hey, the people out there are going to say that, oh, this doesn't apply to the team setting, or, oh, this doesn't apply to the private sector, or, oh, the sports science world won't represent this. So make no mistake about it. I reached out to people that I think are conscious coaches or personalities that understand the holistic importance of this stuff and asked them kindly and provided them with an early copy of it, because this isn't something you can argue with. You can't say if you want to be a good coach that understanding people is a waste of time, so at least that's my view, but hopefully it helps people and the lights flick on there as well.
Absolutely. I want to kind of finish up with on Stop and Give Me 20. We were talking about, I asked you about a book that you might have been reading, and I'm assuming has something to do with it. You were talking about dark-sided leadership traits, and just those words, that's very intriguing. Talk to us about the dark-sided leadership traits.
Yeah, this is my favorite thing right now. I'm about to give a presentation on it at Rand Phone's place the weekend of March 11th and 12th. And again, just trying to consolidate something into, one image, one example, one word, and then I'll kind of extrapolate from there. Are you familiar with the actor Tom Hardy?
Yes.
Yeah, so Tom Hardy is one of my favorite actors. And what's so intriguing about Tom Hardy is within kind of his persona, whether it's Bane, whether it's Bronson, anything that he plays, and right now I think it's Taboo on FX, there's kind of this dark side to every character he plays. But you also notice that those kinds of characters, and it could be something as simplistic as a comic book adaptation, to somebody like Napoleon, right? One of the greatest military leaders of all time, regardless of the jokes about him. There's something very effective and utilitarian about dark-sided traits like psychopathy, narcissism, Machiavellianism. People that know how to leverage darker parts of their personality, and this is how the research references it, in order to make things happen. And there's a tremendous, tremendous article that I reference both in the book and the presentation that talks about the effectiveness of dark-sided traits and behaviors within elite team leaders. And they look at Champions League, premiership teams, rugby and AFL organizations, and they interview directors of performance and managers at those levels and say, hey, give us examples of when you had to do this, when you kind of had to use Machiavellianism to win over kind of the veterans on the team, to more effectively influence the younger players, or when you had to kind of, orchestrate some things so that certain people with toxic personalities got weeded out or were kind of perceived as outcasts so that you could steer the ship. Kind of like that All Blacks thing, right? No dickheads when they have to sweep the sheds, the more veteran players. There is a Machiavellianism type approach that allows those people to say, hey, this is the new standard of how we operate here, and this is how I'm going to frame things up, and this is how we're going to do things and move forward. And more importantly, I'm going to make it seem like it's your idea. And that's not manipulation in a negative context. Manipulation is not as dirty of a term as people think. There's a scientific context to it. Getting somebody to do what you want them to do is manipulation. It doesn't necessarily have to be a good or a bad thing. And so the way that the authors and the research distinguishes the two of these things is they say, listen, there's dark-sided traits. So, for example, let's say, so-and-so is narcissistic. That means a trait, that's how they are nearly all the time, almost all the time. Whereas a behavior, you can be a non-narcissistic individual, but still leverage a narcissistic behavior when you need to. And a good example of that would be Teddy Roosevelt. And they were talking about his time within presidency, or any effective leader, right? No matter what realm you want to look at. If somebody wasn't inherently narcissistic, even a little bit, then you would not have people that take over these positions that have tremendous obstacles in front of them and think, yeah, I can do this. I know there's some significant obstacles in front of me and there's tremendous turnaround that needs to be done, but I got this. That requires an element of narcissism. And there's a very thin line. Somebody would say, well, no, that's confidence. No, like there's people that literally think I'm the perfect man for this job. I'm the right person for this job. That line is a little blurred depending on the level in which you express it. And they found that. They've looked through the research and kind of said, okay, who are some of the most effective presidents throughout history? And they found that ones that they rated, and the research and the book goes into this in more detail, they look at them and they all kind of, the more effective presidents or leaders score relatively high in this kind of dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Because they even talk about the wisdom of psychopaths in this book. It just says, listen, psychopaths know how to draw a line between what's called hot empathy and cold empathy. Hot empathy is I feel what you feel, right? So if somebody's going through a tremendous hardship, it almost kind of brings me down with them because I'm so in tune with that. Whereas cold empathy is not I feel what you feel, but I have an understanding and appreciation for how you're feeling. And they look at some of the most high-level surgeons, and one is quoted within this book, The Wisdom of Psychopaths, of saying, in my profession, empathy is entropy. I can't afford to feel anything towards the people that I'm operating on. I have to remain 100% completely focused on the objective and kind of dehumanize this individual. Otherwise, it's going to cloud my judgment. And that goes into Antonio Damasio, who's the author of the book Descartes' Error, and a professor at USC of cognitive neuroscience. He just says, listen, emotion will cloud reason. And as a leader, you cannot afford that because emotion will already trump logic over time. And that is not a hallmark trait of a great leader. So yes, you have to have empathy. Yes, you have to have compassion, but you also need to know how to dehumanize, maneuver, and manipulate these things. And that is something that dark triad type individuals, Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy, those that score high on those kinds of traits, are able to do really well. They can get just close enough to the situation that they know how to manipulate it, but they can also kind of draw themselves back. So the big distinction for anybody that, almost kind of feels dirty listening to this, you need to understand that the research around this is looking at what people do in certain situations and contexts, not who they are. I am not saying that narcissists, psychopaths, and people that are manipulators or Machiavellian type approach adopters through and through are the best coaches and the best leaders. I am saying that people that know how to leverage certain traits or dark-sided parts of their personality are more effective than people that kind of follow this wishy-washy, everything's going to be fine, think positive, all these kinds of things all the time. That's not reality. And that's not how our emotions are meant to be leveraged. We're not supposed to discount or discredit negative parts of ourselves or our reactions or our behavior. So it goes down a very, very, very deep-seated rabbit hole within those. And the research talks about when you say, well, how are you defining these things? Because that's usually where that goes next. It goes into evolutionary theory, evolutionary psychology. And if you want to dig deeper than even in my book, just look at the references in the back of the book. But these things go into providing a theory for the existence of these traits in humans or even other species, providing an explanation, even if only in part, for the efficacy of each individual trait, and also providing a prediction, at least in the general form, of these trait paradoxes. So when there's good and bad traits or bright and dark-sided traits, and there's also an upside and downside to each of these traits, like the downside of a particularly bright-sided trait like emotional stability. Well, if you're just somebody who's the picture of equanimity all the time, and your athletes never see you celebrate, they never see you frustrated, they never see you even display an ounce of emotion, how close are they going to relate to you, right? And I've worked with coaches like that, and they have their own strengths, but they're not coaches that athletes ever really trust, because those athletes don't ever really know how to get a read on them, and they're playing that game as well. So you need to be comfortable displaying your highs, your lows, getting in there with the team. Kind of, you don't have to be. It's not saying you're a hoorah guy. It just means that you should be comfortable showing all aspects of your personality, regardless of what that is. So really, really awesome stuff. This is what I'm digging into right now, and I hope to kind of extrapolate it more to have it make more sense for all coaches. And the book touches on it pretty deep.
Love it. Wow. So interesting, and really looking forward to March 11th. This comes out, Conscious Coaching. And for more information, everybody can go to consciouscoachingbook.com. We'll have the link not only to the book, but to some of Brett's social media as well. So, Brett, thanks so much for coming on. This has been 55 minutes now, and I feel like it's been 2. You have a way of doing that, so doing some great stuff, and we really appreciate you coming on and talking about the book.
No, always appreciate it. Likewise, I appreciate your interest in it. I think this is a fun part that, hopefully more people take interest in, and, we can continue to build enthusiasm for this side of it, just like we do the training side. So thanks so much for being willing to listen and learning more about the book yourself. I appreciate it.
All right, well, that's going to do it for episode 201 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Special thanks to Chris Pryor, Aaron McGurn, and the folks over at Perform Better. You can check them out at performbetter.com for all their products and info on their educational seminars. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Coach Bartholomew for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength and conditioning, performance enhancing, and coaching. Rachel Cosgrove for the Results Fitness University Business of Fitness segment. Check them out at resultsfitnessuniversity.com. Kyle Kiesel and Functional Movement Systems. Check them out at functionalmovement.com. And of course, remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out for 3 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, and programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every day. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com. Click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. My name's Anthony Rennie. You can reach me at strengthcoachpodcast@gmail.com. Thanks again, and I'll speak to you next time.